Have you ever noticed the quiet ones, the deep thinkers, the wisest souls in your life, just slipping away? They're not making a scene or burning bridges. They're silently vanishing, leaving their jobs, fading from social media, choosing solitude over society. Carl Jung saw this coming. He called it the necessary withdrawal, a psychological turning point, where staying in a world asleep feels like betraying your soul. In this video, we're diving into why the most awake among us are disappearing, what Carl Jung's wisdom reveals about this phenomenon, and how it might be a sign you're on the edge of a profound transformation. Stick with us to uncover the truth behind their silent exodus and what it means for you. Picture this. You're scrolling through social media, and every post feels like a scream for attention, outrage, drama, or carefully curated facades. Or maybe you're at a work meeting where everyone's nodding along to ideas they don't believe in, just to keep the peace. You feel it, don't you? That subtle, gnawing discomfort, like you're trapped in a game no one else knows they're playing. Carl Jung would say, you're not imagining it. You're brushing up against the collective unconscious, the invisible force that powers society's norms, beliefs, and shadows. And for those who are spiritually awake, this force doesn't just feel restrictive, it feels like a psychological cage. So, what exactly is the collective unconscious? Carl Jung described it as the shared reservoir of human experience, archetypes, instincts, and unspoken agreements that shape how societies function. It's the unwritten rulebook that tells us to smile politely, chase status, or pick sides in endless debates. It's why we scroll mindlessly, argue about politics, or buy into trends we don't even like. The collective unconscious isn't a conspiracy. It's the default setting of human society. And it only works if everyone plays along, asleep to the deeper truth. But here's the catch: when you start waking up, when you begin to see through the illusions, you become a glitch in the system. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the journey toward your authentic self, where you question the rules everyone else takes for granted. Let's ground this in a story. Meet Sarah, a 32-year-old graphic designer who used to thrive on the buzz of city life. She was active on social media, posting her art, chasing likes, and networking at every event. But over time, something shifted. The constant need to perform, to post the right content, to say the right things started to feel hollow. Every scroll through Instagram left her drained, like she was drowning in a sea of masks. She noticed people arguing over politics, not to understand, but to win. She saw friends projecting their insecurities, calling it confidence. Sarah wasn't just tired, she was psychologically suffocating. Carl Jung would say Sarah was waking up to the collective unconscious. She was starting to see the shadow projections, the unacknowledged fears, désir, and darkness that society buries and projects onto others. Think about it: every time a group labels another as the problem, that's the collective shadow at work. The other political party, the wrong ideology, the scapegoated community. It's all a game of projection. Society thrives on this. It's how we avoid facing our own flaws. But when you're awake, you see it for what it is, a mass delusion. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. For Sarah, this realization was both liberating and isolating. She started noticing how her co-workers played their roles, smiling through stress, gossiping to bond, or chasing promotions to feel worthy. She saw it in her family too, conversations stuck on surface-level topics, avoiding anything too real. Every interaction felt like a script, and she was the only one who'd torn up her lines. Carl Jung experienced this himself. As his own consciousness expanded, He found casual social interactions unbearable, not because he was above others, but because he could see the unconscious games everyone was playing. It's like being the only one awake in a room full of sleep talkers. You hear the words, but they don't make sense anymore. This is where the trap tightens. The collective unconscious isn't just a backdrop, it's a force that demands participation. Stay in line. Play your role. Don't question the system. For the spiritually awake, this demand feels like a betrayal of their truth. Sarah tried to keep up posting online, attending events. But every time she did, it felt like she was dimming her light to fit in. She'd leave conversations feeling drained, not because she was introverted, but because she was expending massive energy trying to translate her awakening into a language the unconscious could understand. Carl Jung called this psychological labor the invisible work of maintaining your consciousness in a world that's asleep. Let's break this down with another example. Imagine Mark, a high school teacher who spent years diving into Jung's work. He started noticing how his students mirrored society's unconscious patterns, chasing popularity, hiding their true selves, or lashing out to avoid vulnerability. Even his colleagues played the game, sticking to safe topics and avoiding deeper discussions about purpose or meaning. Mark tried to bring authenticity to his classroom, sharing insights about self-awareness. But he was met with blank stares or polite nods. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they couldn't see what he saw. The gap between his consciousness and their unconsciousness was too wide. Every day, Mark felt like he was swimming upstream, fighting to hold on to his truth, while surrounded by a current pulling him back. This is why society feels like a trap for the awake. The collective unconscious thrives on sameness, shared delusions, agreed upon lies, and suppressed shadows. When you start questioning these, you're not just breaking a rule, you're disrupting the entire system. Carl Jung saw this in his own life. After his deep dive into the unconscious, he couldn't play the role of the proper Swiss psychiatrist anymore. He couldn't nod along to societal norms he saw through. The effort to pretend, to perform the persona society demanded, was exhausting. So, he began to withdraw, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Here's the kicker. This isn't about being better than others. It's about being too aware to keep playing the game. The spiritually awake don't leave society because they hate it. They leave because staying requires them to betray their consciousness. Every fake smile, every shallow conversation, every moment of pretending to agree feels like a small death. For Sarah, it was the moment she deleted her Instagram account, not because she was done with people, but because she was done with performing. For Mark, it was when he took a sabbatical to study Carl Jung in solitude, realizing he needed space to protect his growing awareness. So, what does this mean for you? If you're feeling that pull to step back, to question the noise of society, Carl Jung would say, you're not alone. You're not antisocial or broken. You're waking up. The collective unconscious is powerful, but it's not your truth. It's a system built on shadows, and you're starting to see the light. In the next chapter, we'll explore why staying in this system can feel so painful for the awake, and why that pain is a sign you're on the right path. Imagine walking into a room where everyone's shouting, but they don't realize they're making noise. You try to join the conversation, but every word feels like a lie, because you see what they can't, the truth beneath their masks. For the spiritually awake, this isn't just a metaphor, it's a daily reality. Carl Jung understood that when you become conscious, staying in a world steeped in unconsciousness doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels painful psychologically, emotionally, even physically. In this chapter, we'll explore why this pain arises, why staying in society feels impossible for the awake, and how that pain is a sign you're on the path to something greater. Let's start with a story. Meet Emily, a 35-year-old marketing manager who seemed to have it all: a high-flying career, a vibrant social circle, and a packed calendar of events. But deep down, Emily felt like she was suffocating. Every meeting at work required her to nod along to corporate jargon, pretending she cared about metrics over meaning. Every dinner with friends felt like a performance, laughing at jokes she didn't find funny, dodging questions about her true feelings. Even scrolling through social media drained her. As she watched people post polished versions of their lives while ignoring their inner struggles, Emily wasn't just tired, she was in psychological agony. Why? Because she was awake in a world that demanded she stay asleep. Carl Jung called this the burden of consciousness. When you awaken to your authentic self, you become hyper-aware of the unconscious dynamics around you. You see the projections, the repressed emotions, the unspoken fears driving every interaction. It's like gaining X-ray vision for the human psyche. Emily started noticing how her co-workers hid their insecurities behind aggressive ambition, how her friends used gossip to avoid vulnerability, how social media was a stage for collective shadow play. Every interaction required her to navigate this minefield of unconsciousness, and it was exhausting. Carl Jung experienced this himself. As his own individuation deepened, he found social gatherings unbearable, not because he disliked people, but because he could feel the weight of their unacknowledged shadows pressing against his psyche. This pain isn't just emotional, it's energetic. Carl Jung believed that when you become conscious, you also become energetically sensitive. Being around unconscious behavior feels like psychological violence, not because you're judging others, but because their unprocessed emotions and projections clash with your clarity. Picture Emily at a networking event, surrounded by people pitching their personal brands. She could sense the desperation behind their smiles, the fear of not being enough driving their hustle. It wasn't just awkward, it was somatic. Her chest tightened, her head ached, and she felt an overwhelming urge to flee. Carl Jung would say, this wasn't weakness, it was her psyche screaming for protection from the collective unconscious. Let's look at another example. David, a 42-year-old lawyer, spent years studying Carl Jung's work in his spare time. He began to see the courtroom not just as a place of justice, but as a theater of shadow projections. Clients blamed opponents for their own failures. Colleagues chased status to mask their doubts. David tried to stay engaged, to be the good lawyer his firm expected. But every case felt like a charity. He'd sit in meetings, watching people argue over technicalities while ignoring the deeper human truths at play. The effort to keep up this persona, to pretend he didn't see the unconscious games, was draining his soul. One day, after a particularly heated deposition, David felt a wave of nausea, not from stress, but from the dissonance of living inauthentically. This is what makes staying impossible: the constant demand to betray your consciousness. Society doesn't just ask you to participate, it asks you to dim your light, to suppress your truth, to play a role that no longer fits. For the awake, every interaction becomes a choice. Speak your truth and risk alienation, or stay silent and betray yourself. Carl Jung called this psychological labor the invisible work of holding your consciousness steady while surrounded by unconsciousness. It's like trying to keep a candle lit in a storm. Every conversation, every social expectation, every scroll through a feed of outrage or fakery threatens to snuff out your flame. This labor takes a toll. Carl Jung noticed that his most conscious patients often developed physical symptoms: chronic fatigue, headaches, even mysterious illnesses, not from personal issues, but from the exhaustion of navigating unconscious environments. Emily started having migraines after work meetings, not because of the workload, but because of the energy she spent filtering out her colleagues' projections. David's nausea wasn't just stress, it was his body rejecting the lie of his persona. Carl Jung's insight was revolutionary. This pain isn't a flaw, it's a signal. Your psyche is telling you that staying in an unconscious world is no longer sustainable. But here's the deeper truth. This pain is also a guide. Carl Jung believed that the discomfort of consciousness is a call to action, a sign that you're outgrowing the collective container. For Emily, the pain pushed her to take a hard look at her life. She started journaling, diving into Carl Jung's ideas about the shadow and the authentic self. She realized that her migraines weren't random, they were her psyche's way of saying, "Stop pretending. You can't keep playing this game." For David, the nausea led him to take a leave of absence, spending weekends in nature to reconnect with his inner voice. Both were beginning to feel what Carl Jung called the pull to withdraw, not out of weakness, but out of a deep need to protect their awakening. This pull isn't about running away, it's about survival. The spiritually awake don't leave society because they're selfish or superior. They leave because staying requires them to sacrifice the consciousness they've worked so hard to cultivate. Every time Emily posted a perfect photo online, it felt like a betrayal of her true self. Every time David argued a case he didn't believe in, it chipped away at his integrity. Carl Jung understood this intimately. After his own confrontation with the unconscious, he couldn't keep up the facade of the proper psychiatrist. The effort to pretend, to perform for a world that couldn't see his truth, was too costly. So, he withdrew not to escape, but to preserve what he'd discovered. If you're feeling this pain, the exhaustion of pretending, the ache of seeing what others can't, Carl Jung would say, you're not broken, you're awake. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign you're growing beyond the collective unconscious. It's your psyche begging you to stop dimming your light to fit in. In the next chapter, we'll explore the hermit phase, why withdrawing from society isn't just a choice, but a psychological necessity for the awake, and how it sets the stage for a deeper transformation. You felt it, haven't you? That quiet pull to step away, to find silence in a world screaming with noise. It's not about giving up or running away. It's a deep, almost primal urge to protect something precious inside you. Carl Jung called this the hermit phase, a crucial stage in the journey of individuation where the spiritually awake withdraw from society to nurture their consciousness. For those waking up, this isn't just a choice, it's a psychological necessity. In this chapter, we'll dive into why the hermit phase is essential, how it helps you integrate your authentic self, and why stepping away from the collective is the key to becoming whole. Let's ground this in a story. Meet Anna, a 28-year-old writer who once thrived in the hustle of New York City. She was the life of every literary event, always networking, always chasing the next big break. But as she dove deeper into Carl Jung's work, something shifted. The constant chatter of social circles, the pressure to post on-brand content, the endless race for recognition, it all started to feel like a betrayal of her soul. One day, after a particularly draining book launch party, Anna drove upstate to a small cabin she'd rented on a whim. She planned to stay for a weekend, but weeks turned into months. In that solitude, surrounded by nothing but trees and her own thoughts, she began to hear her inner voice for the first time. This wasn't escape, it was survival. Carl Jung believed the hermit phase is archetypal, a universal pattern in the journey toward wholeness. When you awaken, you start to see the collective unconscious for what it is, a web of projections, personas, and shadows that demands conformity. Staying in that web means dimming your light, suppressing your truth, and fragmenting your psyche to fit in. The hermit phase is your psyche's way of saying, enough. It's a time to step back, to create space where your consciousness can breathe, where your authentic self can emerge without the pressure of society's expectations. For Anna, that cabin wasn't just a retreat. It was a sanctuary where she could integrate the parts of herself she'd buried to play the role of the successful writer. Why is this withdrawal necessary? Because awakening changes you at a fundamental level. As you integrate your shadow, the parts of yourself you once denied, you become more whole, but also more incompatible with a world that thrives on fragmentation. Carl Jung experienced this himself. After his confrontation with the unconscious, he retreated to Bollingen, his stone tower by Lake Zurich. It wasn't a vacation, it was a necessity. In that solitude, he could wrestle with his inner depths, face his shadow, and listen to the voice of his authentic self without the noise of society pulling him back. Bollingen was where Jung became. Jung, not the psychiatrist, not the scholar, but the man who dared to live his truth. Let's look at another example. Michael, a 51-year-old software engineer, had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder. He was good at his job. But after years of studying Carl Jung, he started to feel like a stranger in his own life. Meetings felt like performances, where everyone played their part in a script of productivity. Social gatherings were even worse. Small talk about promotions or politics drowned out any chance for real connection. Michael began to feel physically ill in these settings, not from sickness, but from the dissonance of living inauthentically. One day, he took a leap. He quit his job and moved to a small coastal town. He didn't tell many people, just packed up and left. There, in a quiet house by the sea, he started painting, something he hadn't done since childhood. In that solitude, he found not just peace, but himself. This is the heart of the hermit phase. It's about creating space to integrate what society would fragment. When you're awake, you can't keep performing the persona, the mask society demands. For Anna, staying in New York meant pretending to care about fame over depth. For Michael, staying in the corporate world meant silencing the creative voice he'd rediscovered. Carl Jung taught that the hermit phase is where you let go of these masks and face your shadow head-on. It's where you ask the hard questions. Who am I without the roles I've played? What's my truth when no one's watching? This process can't happen in the chaos of society. It requires silence, solitude, and courage. But here's the thing. The hermit phase isn't about staying gone forever. It's about preparation. Carl Jung saw withdrawal as a chrysalis, a time of transformation where you shed the old self to birth the new. Anna's months in the cabin weren't about hiding. They were about writing from her soul, creating work that resonated with her truth, rather than the market's demands. Michael's time by the sea wasn't about abandoning responsibility. It was about rediscovering his creativity, which later inspired him to teach art to local kids. The hermit phase is where you gestate the gifts you'll eventually bring back to the world, not as a participant in the collective unconscious, but as a beacon of consciousness. Carl Jung emphasized that this phase is archetypal because it's universal. Every spiritual tradition has its version of the hermit, the monk retreating to a cave, the sage wandering the wilderness, the seeker meditating in silence. It's not about rejecting society, it's about protecting your awakening from a world that's not ready for it. Without this phase, your consciousness risks being drowned out by the collective's noise. Anna found that her best writing came when she stopped chasing trends and listened to her inner voice. Michael discovered that his paintings carried a depth he couldn't access in the corporate grind. Their withdrawals weren't failures, they were acts of psychological necessity. If you're feeling the pull to withdraw, to leave the noise, to seek silence, Carl Jung would say, you're not running away. You're answering a call. The hermit phase isn't about isolation. It's about integration. It's about giving your psyche the space to become whole to align with your authentic self, to prepare for what comes next. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the spiritually awake return not to the mainstream, but to the edges of society, where they offer their gifts to those ready to receive them. You've stepped away, found silence, and discovered the truth of who you are. But what happens next? Does the journey end in solitude? Or is there a purpose to your withdrawal? Carl Jung believed that the spiritually awake don't disappear forever, they return. But not to the world they left. They come back as border dwellers, living on the edges of society, offering gifts of wisdom to those ready to receive them. In this chapter, we'll explore how the awakened reappear, why they don't return to the mainstream, and how their transformation becomes a beacon for others on the path to consciousness. Let's start with a story. Meet Lisa, a 40-year-old therapist who once ran a bustling practice in Chicago. She loved helping people. But as she deepened her study of Carl Jung's work, she felt increasingly disconnected. Her clients wanted quick fixes. Her colleagues chased prestige. And the mental health field often felt like a machine prioritizing profit over healing. The dissonance was unbearable. Lisa took a radical step. She closed her practice and moved to a small town in Oregon. For 2 years, she lived quietly, studying Carl Jung, meditating, and working through her own shadow. She thought she'd left her career behind. But one day, a friend asked her to counsel someone going through a spiritual crisis. Lisa hesitated, but something clicked. She realized her withdrawal had prepared her for a new kind of work. Now, she mentors a small group of seekers, helping them navigate their own awakenings. She's not part of the mainstream anymore. She's a guide on the edges, offering depth to those who seek it. Carl Jung saw this return as the final stage of the hero's journey: withdrawal, transformation, and reappearance with gifts. The spiritually awake don't come back to play the old games of the collective unconscious. They can't. Once you've integrated your shadow and found your authentic self, slipping back into society's personas is like trying to wear a child's clothes. They don't fit anymore. Instead, the awakened return to what Carl Jung called the margin spaces, where consciousness can thrive without compromise. They become artists, healers, teachers, or guides, not for the masses, but for those who are also waking up. Their return isn't about fitting in, it's about creating new spaces for authenticity. Consider another example. James, a 33-year-old former marketing executive, felt suffocated by the corporate world's obsession with image and profit. After years of studying Carl Jung, he recognized the collective shadow in every boardroom: fear of failure masked as ambition, competition hiding, insecurity. He quit his job and spent a year in solitude, living in a rural cabin, writing poetry, and exploring his inner world. At first, he thought he'd abandoned his old life for good. But in that silence, James discovered a gift. His poetry spoke to the struggles of awakening in a sleeping world. He started sharing his work online, not for likes or fame, but to connect with others feeling the same pull. Today, James runs a small online community where he hosts discussions about Carl Jung's ideas, drawing in people who feel lost in society's noise. He's not shouting from the mainstream, he's whispering from the edges. And those who need to hear him find their way. This is what Carl Jung meant by border dwellers. The awakened don't return to the center of society, where unconsciousness reigns. They create parallel structures, small communities, creative projects, or quiet acts of service where consciousness can flourish. Carl Jung himself lived this way after his time at Bollingen. He didn't go back to being the proper Swiss psychiatrist. Instead, he wrote books, worked with select patients, and shared insights that rippled out to those ready for them. His tower wasn't just a retreat, it was a laboratory where he crafted ideas that would change the world, not by conforming to it, but by offering an alternative. The return isn't about fame or recognition, it's about contribution. Lisa's work with spiritual seekers is small but profound. She's not on billboards or trending on social media, but for the handful of people she guides, she's a lifeline. James' poetry doesn't go viral, but it resonates with those who feel like outsiders in their own lives. Carl Jung believed this is how evolution happens. The awakened pioneer new paths, creating spaces for others to follow. They don't force their wisdom on the collective. They offer it quietly, trusting that those who are ready will find them. But why not return to the mainstream? Because the mainstream demands compromise. It asks the awakened to dim their light, to play the persona, to participate in the collective shadow. Carl Jung saw this in his patients who completed Individuation. 1. A 55-year-old artist named Clara left her high-profile gallery career after awakening to her authentic self. She couldn't keep producing art for trends or collectors. It felt like selling her soul. After a year of solitude in a mountain studio, Clara began creating again. But this time for herself, she started teaching workshops in her small town, sharing her process with aspiring artists who crave depth over fame. Clara didn't go back to the art world spotlight. She built a new space where authenticity could thrive. This pattern is everywhere. The awakened return, as writers crafting books for seekers, as healers working with those in spiritual crisis, as teachers guiding small groups towards self-discovery. They don't rejoin the collective unconscious. They build bridges to a new kind of consciousness. Carl Jung called this the work of the aquarium fish beings who've adapted to depths the collective can't yet reach. They swim in different waters, but their presence signals that deeper waters exist. For those still caught in society's noise, these border dwellers are a reminder there's another way to live. If you're feeling the pull to withdraw, or if you've already stepped away, Carl Jung would want you to know this. Your disappearance isn't the end. It's preparation for a return not to the world you left, but to a new role as a guide, a creator, or a beacon. Lisa found her purpose in mentoring those in spiritual crisis. James built a community for the awake. Clara created art that spoke to the soul. Their withdrawals weren't failures. They were the groundwork for something greater. In the next chapter, we'll wrap up with a powerful call to embrace your own journey, whether you're disappearing or ready to reappear, and how your transformation can light the way for others. So here we are, at the end of this journey, through the silent exodus of the spiritually awake. If you felt that pull to step away, to seek silence, to protect the spark of consciousness within you, know this. You're not abandoning the world. You're pioneering a new way of being. Carl Jung saw it clearly. The wisest souls don't disappear because they're weak. They withdraw to transform, to integrate their truth, and to return as beacons for those ready to awaken. Your journey, whether you're in the depths of solitude or stepping back into the world, isn't just personal. It's a ripple that can change the collective. 1. Conscious choice at a time. If this resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share your story in the comments below. Have you felt the call to withdraw? Are you living on the edges? Offering your gifts. Let's create a space for the awake to connect. Subscribe to Jung Psyche Hub and hit the bell so you never miss an insight into your individuation journey. Like this video if it spoke to your soul, and share it with someone who might be feeling the same pull. Together, we're building a community for those who see beyond the noise. Your disappearance isn't the end. It's the beginning of something the world desperately needs. Let's keep waking up. Together,